Mom ate all the cookies. Make her spit them out now.
After my husband shouted this frantically over the phone, my mother-in-law suddenly began to choke, foaming at the mouth, and collapsed. In utter confusion, I called an ambulance, and she was rushed to the hospital. Once there, the test revealed something shocking in her stomach.
Do you have any idea about this?
Do I have any idea? Of course I do. Because what they found was clearly something intended to take my life. My name is Susan, a 32-year-old mystery novelist. I've been married to my husband John for 5 years. However, he's been on assignment in Alaska for the past 6 months. We keep in touch, but he seems so busy that he often doesn't even read my texts. Still, I've been trying to make sure he doesn't feel too lonely, even sending presents with Christmas cards to make him feel less alone. In January, I sent a New Year's card, and in February, I sent Valentine's chocolates. He responded to each with a simple thank you text message. In March, a box of cookies arrived from him, accompanied by a message that read,
I enjoyed your Valentine's chocolates.
I was so excited when I saw the cookies that I immediately called him. The cookies arrived. Thank you so much.
Thank you, too, for the New Year's card and chocolates. I'm sorry I couldn't come home for the holidays.
No worries. It's hard to book flights during that time, and the tickets are expensive.
Actually, these are the first cookies I've ever baked. I hope you like them.
Really? I'll savor them while I'm working on my novel. However, while I was on the phone, I heard a crunching noise behind me. Turning around, I found Linda, my mother-in-law who lives with us, devouring the cookies sent to me. She has a tendency to thoughtlessly eat the snacks I've been looking forward to, as she loves food. Writing mystery novels requires a lot of brain power. I always look forward to treating myself with some sweets while I'm writing. So I've cautioned mother-in-law several times, but she never changes her ways. Before we knew it, she had gobbled down all the cookies. Oh!
Huh? What's up? You already ate the cookies?
I'm sorry. I took my eyes off for a second and mother-in-law ate them all.
What? Mom ate all the cookies I sent? Make her throw them up now.
Why should I? Before I could question my husband's frantic outburst, mother-in-law suddenly began choking, her eyes wide open.
I can't breathe.
And with that, mother-in-law collapsed, frothing at the mouth. What? Mother-in-law, are you okay? Mother-in-law! I hurriedly hung up the call with my husband and dialed 911 while calling out to mother-in-law. She was rushed to the hospital, and I went along in the ambulance pleading, Hang in there, mother-in-law. When we got to the hospital, they pumped her stomach and analyzed the contents. The results were shocking.
Actually, we detected a certain poison in Linda's stomach.
The doctor went on to explain to my son's self that the poison was a highly dangerous substance, odorless and tasteless. It could kill a person with as little as 1 to 3 ounces, and mother-in-law had ingested more than half of that lethal dose. She would need to stay in the hospital for a while for treatment.
I hate to ask, but do you have any idea how she might have ingested this poison?
At the doctor's words, I remembered what mother-in-law had eaten just before, and I felt a cold shiver of terror. This couldn't be. It had to be a mistake. I sat in a chair by my mother-in-law's still unconscious form, my thoughts a blank. But I had to confirm. As soon as I got home to prepare for my mother-in-law's hospital stay, I called my husband. He seemed worried about mother-in-law's sudden collapse.
Is Mom okay?
It looks like she'll have to stay in the hospital for a while. She's unconscious after ingesting poison.
Poison? How could that be?
So I need to ask you something. The cookies mother-in-law ate just before she collapsed, you made them, right?
Are you trying to say you suspect me?
Suddenly my husband's tone hardened. But from the situation, that's the only explanation that makes sense.
Susan, if you're a mystery writer, you should know you can't accuse someone just based on circumstantial evidence. Are you trying to treat me like a criminal without any real proof?
My husband criticized me harshly. It was frustrating, but he was right. But then he said something that made me question my ears.
If anything, you were the one closest to Mom. You're the one who looks suspicious.
What? Are you trying to pin the blame on me?
Well, you started this by suspecting me first, didn't you?
We ended up in a blame game for a while. Finally, my husband lost his temper.
Enough. You can't call the cops without evidence. Anyway, I'm not coming back, so you better take care of Mom.
He slammed down the phone after yelling at me like that. I was shocked, having just had an argument with my husband and then being accused by him. I stared blankly at my phone for a while, but slowly anger started to bubble up within me. Oh, so that's how it is. If you're going to play that way, I'll collect the evidence myself and corner you. Pumping myself up, I grabbed a pair of white gloves and a clear bag used by police to hold evidence from my study. Originally, I bought them as props for the mystery novels I write. Who knew life would bring me a moment to use them in reality? But even with all that said, I didn't know where to start. After all, this was my first time dealing with a real-life situation like this. Despite writing about such things in my novels, I decided to start by examining the area where my mother-in-law had been. The scene was left untouched since the chaos when she fell ill, not even vacuumed. Like a bloodhound, I crawled around the sofa where she had been sitting, and the surrounding area, straining my eyes looking for anything. Is this a piece of cookie? I found something that looked like a piece of cookie my mother-in-law had been eating, picked it up with tweezers, and carefully put it into the bag. Each piece was small, but my mother-in-law often spilled her food, so I managed to collect enough to test for poison. I was also able to gather crumbs for the original cookie box. But this alone wouldn't be strong enough evidence. As my husband said, it's possible that I could have planted it, unless I can get a solid piece of evidence that clearly points to my husband. At this point, a question occurred to me. If my husband really did it, how did he obtain such a dangerous poison? I decided to look into how he could have acquired it. So I phoned a police officer acquaintance of mine, whom I'd gotten to know during research for my novels. As I listened to the police officer's explanation and took notes, I reached a certain possibility. Although I had hoped it wasn't the case, that's what it was. In fact, I had been recording all of my conversations with my editor to refer back to later. I had a hunch about my husband's behavior, so I played back our past conversations, and my suspicions were confirmed. That's right, he no longer loves me. I loved my husband. I never missed giving him presents on occasions like Christmas, New Year's Day, and Valentine's Day, and always kept in touch regularly. But his heart was already moving away from me, realizing that he might even harbor ill will towards me. Tears involuntarily streamed down my cheeks. But crying alone doesn't solve anything. I called my mom, explained the situation, and asked her to take care of my mother-in-law, then hastily booked a flight and a hotel to Alaska, keeping it a secret from my husband. Once there, I staked out the apartment where my husband lived alone. Alaska in March was still covered with snow. I layered a heavy sweater under my down jacket, and, shaking from the cold, I watched my husband. When he left, I carefully followed him, camera in hand, making sure not to be noticed. This was purely my determination and stubbornness. Nevertheless, after a few days, I had collected all the necessary evidence. Now it was time to corner my husband. I stood in front of my husband's apartment and rang the doorbell.
Hey, what? Susan, what are you doing here?
Hello, John. It's been a while since we've met face to face. With a grin, I casually said, standing around in the entryway is no good. Let's talk inside. And I made my way into my husband's room.
So what brings you here?
With a grumpy face, my husband served me a weak coffee. It was his roundabout way of asking me to leave. Oh, is it so inconvenient for a wife to visit her husband?
That's not exactly what I meant.
You don't have to lie. You have a date with another woman after this, don't you? My husband, who was in the middle of sipping his coffee, spit it out in surprise, coughing violently.
Oh, did you come all the way to Alaska just to say that?
Of course not. I have something more important to discuss. I want us to get a divorce. Please, sign the papers.
Whoa. You're still holding a grudge over our argument about Mom? You need to stop with your delusions.
While staring at the divorce papers I handed him, My husband expressed disbelief, but there was a look of panic on his face, and he was breaking out in a cold sweat.
If you're saying I did it, then show me the evidence. The cookie is inside Mom's stomach. I bet nothing's left.
I thought you might say that, so I've gathered some evidence. I'm not so reckless as to fly over here for $500 one way without proof. I first showed him a fragment of a cookie in a clear bag. First, a piece of the cookie you sent. It's enough to detect poison. Even if poison was found in my mother-in-law's stomach, it doesn't necessarily mean the cookie was the cause, so we'll examine this.
But like I said before, there's a chance you put poison in, Susan.
I asked a police officer friend about the poison, and it's not something easily obtained. It's not something a layperson can get through normal channels. It would have to be from a specialized pharmacy.
That makes it even less likely to be me. I don't work for a pharmaceutical company, and I'm not a pharmacist.
My husband slammed his palm on the table to try and intimidate me and end the conversation, but I calmly continued. That's why I thought there might be an accomplice. You seem quite close with this girl, don't you? I presented the next piece of evidence, a photograph. It was a snapshot I had taken while tailing my husband. Seeing it, his face twisted in shock. In the photo was a woman clinging to my husband's arm in a very intimate manner, and my husband had his arm around her waist. Her name is Anne. She works at a nightclub. I took this photo in Anchorage.
Susan, aren't you ashamed of yourself for taking secret photos like this?
Aren't you ashamed of getting close to a nightclub girl while you have a wife? In response to my counterattack, my husband choked on his words and glared at me with resentment. But I would not be intimidated. Apparently, this girl named Anne is working at a nightclub while studying to become a pharmacist at a pharmaceutical university. Maybe she snuck out some poison from the university and talked you into sending me a cookie laced with it.
No, I've only met her at the nightclub. I had no idea she was studying to become a pharmacist or anything about the poison. This is pure speculation with no evidence.
The husband, stuttering and stammering, tried to keep up his excuses. I sighed and pulled out my mobile phone. You know, I think you value her more than me. Sorry, but I have proof. Turning the volume all the way up, I began to play a recorded call between my husband and me. The call should have been coming from his room, yet the faint sound of a shower running and a woman's voice calling, "John, come join me," could be heard in the background. Even for me, it was so faint that I wouldn't notice unless the volume was turned all the way up. Well, your claim of only ever meeting her at the nightclub is clearly a lie. If I dig deeper into the voice, I can find out who it belongs to.
Okay, I get it. I cheated. So what? It's your fault for not being as attractive as Anne, and my infidelity doesn't prove that I poisoned anyone.
The husband, now defiant, sprawled out without any sign of remorse. I decided to play him another call recording. Just before my mother-in-law collapsed, my husband could be clearly heard saying,
"Did Mom eat all the cookies I made? Make her throw up immediately."
"Can you explain why you said that if you knew nothing about it?" My husband bowed his head. Turning pale, he started to speak in a strained voice.
"Susan, how much do you know?"
"I'm guessing that you targeted my life because of the royalties from the novels I've written so far." At that, my husband took a sharp breath, presumably because I'd hit the nail on the head. Royalties are given to the copyright holder, and upon their death, the copyright can be inherited by their family. And copyright, the very thing that provides these royalties, can be inherited by the family once the holder passes away. So he must have been picturing himself living it up with his mistress on those royalties he'd inherit.
"Please, forgive me. I did it because she told me to."
"Oh, really? There's no sign of her having any dirt on you. Are you blaming others again?"
"I thought I hadn't left any evidence. Please, I'm begging you, don't divorce me."
"Do you think I can go on living with a man who's trying to kill me? How would you feel in my position? Either way, I have no intention of forgiving you." I slammed the divorce papers on the table. "Come on, let's get this over with."
Just because I'm begging doesn't mean you can get cocky."
Enraged, my husband grabbed me by the collar with both hands. and tried to throw me to the ground. But then,
That's enough.
the police officers I'd called beforehand burst into the room. I'm glad I called them in advance. You never know what could happen when you're alone. In the end, my husband was arrested. I submitted all the evidence to the police, and right there, I made my husband write up the divorce papers. I had him cover all the hotel and flight expenses to and fro, and then I just breezily went home. The very next day, his mistress was arrested as an accomplice, and the two of them are now comfortably inside a jail cell together. Of course, I demanded a divorce settlement from the two of them, and once I receive it, everything will be wrapped up. Afterwards, I told my mother-in-law, who had been discharged from the hospital, the truth about what happened, and said our goodbyes. I moved to a new apartment, and then, a year later, when I used this experience as a plot for a mystery novel and published it, it surprisingly became a huge hit. For a novelist, every experience, good or bad, can be a source of inspiration.